We'll feed you good. You read the shirt, didn't you? That's what. I'm going to tell you like I tell folks, there ain't but 5 things you need to survive, and that's food, clothing, shelter, air, and water, and 3 of them come out of this committee right here.
The other 2 we don't have any control over.
That's right. Earl, you ready? House Bill 853. And before Earl gets started, I want to say one thing. There seems to be a growing movement that may kick off tomorrow. I don't know. That is not necessarily favorable to the poultry industry in this state. Just because we're going to pass this bill out that Earl's presenting to us is in no way an endorsement of this committee for any one certain kind of way to raise poultry. Poultry is the biggest industry in this state, and this is a good bill that Chairman Earhart's bringing to us. It allows people to grow their own chickens, but it is in absolutely no way an endorsement for one kind of poultry production over another, and it's not a slap in the face to the biggest industry in this state. So I just want to make that clear. So without anything else, Earl, just wherever you want to get. We're not real picky in them. Get a mic there from Terry.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come and present this bill to you. I had thought about a substitute. We had talked about taking roosters out, and Chairman England himself had asked about some honeybees, but it seems the Legislative Council doesn't work on the same schedule as the Agriculture Committee. They're not used to getting up quite as early. So I've been by there a couple times. They do a great job. I just they're not up yet. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the ability to come in here and present this to you. I appreciate your co-sponsors, yourself, Chairman England, Chairman Roberts, and others I've talked to about this bill. I was asked to bring this by a neighbor. As you know, this was a prior initiative by a former late member of this House, but I became involved when a neighbor of mine called me. It became an issue in my neighborhood, of all places, in Cobb County. We're not known for our chicken production in Cobb County. And she'll come up, and Miss Lee Savage will come up and talk about it in a minute. But on a serious side, this is a simple proposition. It very clearly advocates the freedom which ought to be a basic freedom in this country, to grow some of your own food and some of your own chickens, or for your own personal consumption. You would think that would be intuitive. You'd think that there wouldn't be somebody trying to tell you that that's not a good thing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're drowning in a sea of regulatory bureaucracies. What I'm asking in this is just simply, let's step back just a little bit, just once. You'd really think the sky was falling. You're going to hear from probably the counties and the cities here in a minute. They got armies of lobbyists down here, being, by the way, paid for with your money to lobby against your citizens. You're going to hear about home rule. And I want to say something about that. I've been down here a while, and I'll just say it very clearly, I'm sick and tired of hearing about home rule in this sense. We're elected to come down here by our constituents, who are probably the smallest home rule, the smallest individual, to make laws. They'll say, you're preempting us. Well, everything we do preempts, we make laws. If we make one and change something, we've preempted something. If they do something, they preempted something. It's become just a panacea out there. Every time somebody does something you don't like, well, that's home rule, don't touch it. It's getting to be insulting, ladies and gentlemen. We're down here for a reason. If our constituents don't like what we're doing, they'll tell us, oh, you guys come home, go back to doing what you were doing. I just want to put that on the table a little bit. Let me tell you what this does. It allows you to grow some of your own vegetables for your own consumption, and it allows you, if you look at Section 2, to have backyard chickens. Now I'm going to ask you to exclude roosters from that, Mr. Chairman. That was going to be in the substitute, and to add honeybees for Chairman England. And if we can just do that as an amendment, I'd appreciate that. And all it says is that no local government or municipality shall prohibit or require any permit to do this. We're creating a freedom. We're taking that government just a little bit out of the lives of our constituents. Someday we're going to wake up and they're going to tax our memories and tell us whether we can actually walk out of our house without a permit. It's getting to that point. Let me also state that we're not taking it away, these local governments' ability to designate something as a public nuisance. That's where you got to connect the common sense, Gene. If somebody's got chickens, hundreds of chickens running around getting in everybody else's business, underfoot, under cars, they stink, they smell, then that's a public nuisance. You're going to love this definition. I looked up the definition and I've read some of the case law of a public nuisance in the statute. And it's fascinating. It's an old statute. A nuisance is anything that causes hurt, inconvenience, or damage to another. That's a pretty simple standard to prove. And the fact that the act done may otherwise be lawful should not keep it from being a nuisance. In other words, if we make this lawful, it can still be a nuisance. Again, if you connect that common sense, Gene, sometimes these folks want this giant government hammer they can hit you with so that don't do any of this. But here's the part that I like. The inconvenience complained of shall not be fanciful or such as would affect only one of fastidious taste. You're going to hear from the fanciful and fastidious here in just a minute, probably. But it shall be such as would affect an ordinary, reasonable person. So it says unreasonableness. And that's not difficult. These governments just don't want to have to go to any trouble to take away your freedoms. They just want to be able to do it. Let's step back from that a little bit. Let's allow people. And let me say one final thing. You'll hear from Ms. Savage with respect to one of the reasons this has become popular, and this is serious. With respect to breast cancer survivors, their doctors are telling them that they have to eat these healthy vegetables. They must I was sitting in a dentist chair after I had done this. The lady was a survivor. She said her doctor told her clearly that she would have to have these types of eggs. She can't buy the supermarket eggs. I guess they've got hormones in them. Again, I'm not a farmer in that sense. But that's a doctor's recommendation. And we're trying to keep them from having that freedom in a reasonable manner to and not harm anybody else. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to suggest that we pass and allow that freedom in the state of Georgia. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Thanks, sir. Anybody have any questions for Chairman Neil Hart? All right, Jane.
I posed this question to you earlier, and I still have.
I did check on that.
In the bill, it says that folks could grow medical gardening, raise for chickens or rabbits. And
Rabbits.
And not for commercial purposes. My concern is if they grow something in their gardening, they want to sell it at farmers market. Is that considered a commercial?
What I was told is that's considered a casual sale and wouldn't fall under this, but I'd be willing to work with you as we go through the process to check that with the legal counsel on that. I did check it after we spoke on the phone last night. I meant to mention that in my remarks. Thank you.
Memo?
As a youngster, we grew chickens and we grew vegetables, but we lived on the farm. I noticed the bill doesn't specify any size of the lot or anything like that. Now, if you said people in the city,
Yes, sir.
in a small lot, grow these chickens or rabbits or bees.
Yes, sir, only as long as they do not become a public nuisance. If you can, and you can. I didn't bring any pictures. I'd love to show you some of the pictures of the very nice chicken houses that are done in the urban environments. You're talking about not a great deal of chickens or not some massive garden in your small urban environment.
Good.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this bill. I know there's been a lot of discussion about it. I would like to say, though, that the people who enacted these ordinances are elected by the people, too. I happen to have been one of those in the past, and I know that they can throw the bum out if they don't like what's done. So most of these laws are agreeable to the local people where they're enacted. If not, then I think repeal the necessary, get rid of the people governing, as you said they would us, if we're not protective of our people's rights. This code section basically protects agricultural rights. Any agricultural zone is allowed to continue regardless of the development. And I think we have protected our agricultural rights. I also, though, think that in this case we may be trying to take away the rights of some who acquired property under a certain restriction, and now are being told that they can't abide by or can't have the protection of that restriction. And that bothers me a little bit. I've got a couple of concerns, and I'd like to ask if you would accept an amendment that I think would allay my concern.
Okay.
All right, the first one is on line 26. If we could replace code section 41-2-4 with 41-2-3, the dash 4 is basically the building of a nuisance, and you can stop the building of it with an injunction, etc. The 41-2-3 just simply allows a person to file a right of complaint against the nuisance, and I think it would be more applicable in this case.
I'm just reading it very quickly.
Yeah, go ahead. That's
Representative Harden. 3 is the filing of the petition for the injunction. 4 is the issuance of the injunction.
Yeah, but if you read 3, and that kind of bothers me a little bit on 4, where the consequence of a nuisance about to be erected or commenced will be irresponsible damage. Such consequences not merely possible, but all we want to do is allow people to have the right to file a right of action.
Representative Harden, I don't really have any problem. I don't think legally there's that great a distinction, but if you'll support the underlying bill, I'll be more than happy to accept the amendment.
One other small amendment.
All right, well, let's keep talking.
On line 18, if we could, after the word shall, insert after the effective date of this law, enact any local ordinance to prohibit or require, etc. Now, what I think that does for me is says that the people who ask for that ordinance through their local elected officials to begin with will not be disenfranchised. And the people who would like to have it changed then have the right and ability to go to their local, their local elected official and change those that are a problem at that point. And I think that protects everybody's rights, basically, if we do.
Representative Harden, the fact of the matter is, what that does, though, is we might as well not do it if we don't. That's kind of one of those catfish deals. I don't necessarily, if you add after the date of this ordinance, you know what? I'm not sure exactly what you're trying, because every new statute is after the date of the ordinance. We're not trying to necessarily say that it's the state statute that we're changing here. We're just saying that they can't preempt something like that. So
Right.
if the intent...
We're basically negating all local statutes. And again, those were created by local people and local government. That's home rule. And I just like to give them the chance to reverse their bad decisions as you see it, rather than us saying,
Well, that, Representative Harden, with all due respect, that pretty much guts the intent of the bill. I probably couldn't accept that one.
All right. Thank you.
Glenn?
I don't think there's a big movement afoot to co-op everybody around and challenge the poultry market here in Georgia.
Oh, no.
I wouldn't think that.
No, so the Poultry Association came to me and said they don't have any issues with this. I talked to Giles.
How do they handle homeowners associations? Because I'm wondering about, I'm thinking about mine, because we have several folks in our area that in my subdivision in William County that have nice gardens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd hate to go tell Mr. Scandrett, who's family has owned this property for 100 years or more, that, Mr. Candrell, you can't grow any more corn. You can't bring me any corn. You can't grow your tomatoes and bring me tomatoes. So you can't sell your corn on the back of the truck on Saturday.
I agree with you there.
The bank. And by the way, you're going to have to get rid of those laying hens you got down there.
No, that's what I'm trying to make sure that he has that continued capacity. I think you're asking similar to what Representative Tanksley was asking about. We don't want to prohibit those casual sales at all.
Exactly right.
And that's not going to,
We've worked hard now to get us there's some good things that come out of Clayton County.
I would agree.
A lot of folks question that, but I'll assure you they are.
I assure you my interpretation.
That's right.
Representative Baker, this bill won't preclude that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Susan.
You know, Mr. Chairman, I think backyard gardens are wonderful. I have a real problem with growing chickens in the backyard. Having been mayor of the city of Monticello for 12 years, we had a problem with that. And we had an ordinance opposed to it, but we still had people who occasionally would have chickens in their backyard, and they would invariably fly out of they'd say, oh, well, we've got a fence, we got a gate. Well, chickens fly, as we know. It just got to be, it got to be a problem that the neighbors who lived in the city and felt like they should be protected from that type of nuisance didn't have. Backyard gardens are wonderful. I'm all for that. I feel like that folks in the cities need to decide, whether they want this or not, and I have a problem with it. And I think that Representative Harden has stated very well what some of us agree with.
John?
Mr. Chairman, just clarify for me, I think I understand the impact, but in a private scenario where you have covenants in place and a homeowners association, how would that be affected by this bill?
In the same way that any statute is affected, a homeowners association cannot preempt a basic statute. They can't come in and tell you that you can break the laws either. It works both ways in that sense.
Rick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this up. Appreciate it addresses just the basic things that folks that I've worked with for 30 years think about: freedom, health, quality of life. And I just want to make sure I understood, is it possible to include beekeeping or exclude?
The Chairman England is going to have an amendment to include Chairman Roberts that includes beekeeping and excludes roosters.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Rob?
Well, my nearest neighbor's a half mile down the road, and it won't bother me, but I do represent parts of Houston County, and it's got some very tight-knit, zero-lot line houses, even condominiums. Can I foresee chickens out in the common area of a condominium complex, everybody in the high-rise trying to do that in the front of it?
That would be common property, and this only refers to private property.
That's correct. It's private property, yes, sir.
Well,
And I'd suggest
Just trying to get my mind
no,
to what
I'd suggest that no more so than any common property would allow any other type of public nuisance. If an individual in one of those areas had 17 dogs, they couldn't let them run loose on the property. If they had any other type of pet, potbelly pigs are allowed, and they are allowed to restrict those types of things. What we're saying is in a reasonable nature and not in a public nuisance manner. If you want to have a backyard garden or some hens to have eggs that your doctors ask you to eat, then we're not going to restrict that because it's a basic. Once again, all I'm asking is that these areas connect the common sense gene. It says it right there in the statute. A reasonable person standard. It doesn't say, it says clearly that prima facie is not a nuisance. You've got to basically act in a manner that's not a public nuisance. So there's a reasonable standard for these types of things, and anytime they were out running around like that is unreasonable, and they're a public nuisance, and they should be asked to cease and desist at that point. But if they're not harming anyone, why take an overall, well, you just can't do that because we don't want to take the time and effort to check and see whether or not you're doing your business in a reasonable manner.
Mr. O'Neill, I'm gonna let you ask a question, Ellis.
I'm technically on your committee, Mr. Chairman, and I'm so proud of that now. Mr. Chairman, I want to follow up on Chairman Burns' question.
Sure.
Ask you to point out to me in the bill where it does include covenants and right of the land. Does this actually preempt covenants?
I don't think it preempts covenants any more than any other statute we have that doesn't come in and expressly indicate that all, I mean, you read through the statutory language in most of the code, it doesn't expressly recognize covenants. Covenants such as that have legal precedent, they have case law backing them up and those types of things. I am reluctant to come in and expressly recognize covenants in all our different statutory authorities that we participate in. That's why I didn't put anything in there on that. I mean, why would we want to recognize covenants in one section of the law and then not in the others? I guess was my question to myself when I thought about that.
I agree with you, but I must have misunderstood you when you responded to his question. So this does not preempt. In your view, that's not your intent.
As long as I think if they made a standard that was completely outside and says you absolutely could not, I think they have to recognize this. A covenant, in my understanding, has to recognize the same legal standards as the state law, the county law, the city laws, and those types of things. If they go outside of those, then those covenants are not enforceable, correct? I mean, that's my understanding. You can't have a homeowners association covenant that sets you astride or in opposition to a local statute, correct? I mean, homeowners association can't say you're allowed to go 75 miles an hour down our homeowners' streets. That would be a covenant that was.
The real term is restrictive covenant.
Restrictive
and
covenant.
You can restrict use of property, whether you do that through a homeowners association, but more importantly, covenants are put on property by the owners of the property. There's probably no more preeminent private property right in our law than to be able to put restrictions on your own property. He who buys or takes transfers of the property subsequent to the covenant does so subject to the covenant, the restrictive covenant. So
But I would
my
suggest.
question is, does this attempt to preempt restrictive covenant put on by an owner or an association? I understand it preempts the government.
I think it preempts, in the same way or manner it does any other law. Though I'm not suggesting that it doesn't preempt their ability. Just like if there's a local statute, Mr. Leader, that says that you can't have chickens on less than 2 acres. This statute would say, no, that you can, unless it becomes a public nuisance. That same standard is what I'm saying would apply to a homeowners association covenant. Even though it is, we're trying to come up with a relevant example with respect to that. What if a homeowners association covenant said, after you had signed up these things are 20 years old, and what if a group of homeowners got together after 15 years and said, well, we don't want the people who live in this subdivision now to be able to walk down the street after 6 o'clock at night. Now, that's a basic freedom. Would we allow, would the local statute allow them to place a restriction such as that on the individuals who lived in that subdivision? No. I mean, that's that basic. You can't restrict more so than the basic freedoms, constitutional rights, statutory authorities that are out there. So what I'm saying is, yes, this does restrict a local homeowners association from saying any more than the local statute has. I'm saying it.
Preempts private property right.
I would say that it doesn't preempt a private property right. I'd say it preempts going beyond the local statute. Everything we do could preempt a private property right, or everything the city does, or anything the county does. Isn't that what some statutory authorities do? Preempt or add to the basic rights and freedoms we have? I'm not following that.
The preeminent example of a private property right is to be able to do what you want to on your own property as long as it doesn't mess with your neighbor. Not restrict what you can do on your own property that we rent from the government once a year whenever we pay taxes. That's what private property rights are, not somebody telling you what you can't do with your property.
I would agree, Mr.
Ellis?
Chairman.
Doc, you got a question?
Yeah.
Let get Ellis first.
Now, we're getting into some legalese here. And, we got one attorney, I don't believe her attorney, but
State of Holiday
it's
Express.
my understanding that these deed covenants and everything can restrict, but you do it voluntarily. You can surrender your rights. And I believe, and I'm no attorney, but I believe what you'd find here is this would not interfere with deed restrictions and covenants and condominium contracts, but voluntary neighborhood associations, I think it would properly supersede those. But
I think so.
You might want to get some legal interpretation.
Doc?
Mr. Chairman, I am for this 100% plus for having private rights, and I think you ought to be able, in one of my little districts, in one of my little towns in my district, they had a real controversial issue where some chickens had been out and just running all over the place. The new city council put an ordinance against them now. Now, if we have it, this says in a coop or in a pen. If they get out of the pen, out of the yard, does this void this bill?
I think that's a clear case at that point for a public nuisance, and they ought to be asked to cease and desist with the chickens.
What I'm saying is, if they don't keep them in the pen, then they could stop them from having them in the pen?
Yes, that's the clear language of this bill. Yes, they could.
Okay.
Under the public nuisance statute.
Buddy?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just one other, and this may be the Lawyers Full Employment Act, because in addition to, I think, that challenging contracts, it also is probably going to promote a lot of legal action between citizens. And, you know, having been in local government, I realize that both sides of an issue like this are very passionate. Those who want to protect their property rights and those who want to protect their property rights. So, it's a big concern of mine that we will see a lot of legal action, and it may be against people who really can't afford legal actions these days. And I'm afraid we're putting some people in a position where they may run into that.
Mr.
And that's so. And that was the reason for my initial request for that.
Bill?
I was just going to comment. I think Representative Black was on to what I think would probably be the distinction between, there's a difference between these deed covenants and agreeing to do that. And I think, I know there's, the freedom to contract. One has that ability to enter into a contract and negotiate what they're willing to abide by. And because when a covenant's broken, it's the enforcement actions in the nature of a breach of the covenant or contract. So I don't know that this would necessarily, this speaks to governments, but I don't know that it would necessarily preempt.
That's my interpretation as well. I agree.
So I don't know if you're looking for, but that may be worth fleshing out and getting more clarification on.
Doc?
If when it comes time, I'd like to make a motion that we do that.
Anybody else have any questions? We got a couple folks want to talk, Doc. Yes, ma'am.
Certainly.
I live in a small municipality and have always had a garden. And I have a back door neighbor that has chickens, so I'm not opposed to this. And as the chairman explained, right to do whatever you like with your property as long as it doesn't infringe on the rights of others. Well, in a lot of municipalities, you may have a lot as small as a quarter of an acre. And in your bill, you mentioned chicken and
Representative Tyson, I think, I think there is protection, and I think it's under the public nuisance statute that allows, it says a nuisance is anything that causes hurt. I guess you couldn't make a claim of hurt, inconvenience. I mean, if that's I think that would be a more reasonable claim under the scenario that you, or damage to another. I think you could make a claim under both of those. I think you could claim a psychological harm with respect to the seeing a rabbit being slaughtered, or that, and again, that's all I'm asking, is that those local officials, code enforcement officers in this case, would make a reasonable determination that if one of your neighbors was standing out there slaughtering rabbits in front of your children, and I think, and then it says, okay, here's the standard we're going to put in place. The reasonable person. Would a reasonable person find that to be a public nuisance? I think they would. But again, we don't, like you said, we don't want to preclude those who are doing it right from having that freedom. And we've set up a situation where those who are doing it and creating a nuisance or doing it wrong can still be cited, prosecuted, told to stop. All I'm asking for is the balance in that, not a, and public nuisances, it's not that hard to prove. I've read through the case law. I recommend reading the cases on public nuisances that are cited in this code section. There's hundreds of examples of cities and counties and municipalities being able to very quickly and very expeditiously, without any real dollar expenditure, to win that case.
It may not be hard to prove, but it is hard to enforce when you're in a small municipality and trying to, have a decent relationship with your neighbors and be a good neighbor yourself. Anyway, that's a concern.
Yeah, well, in our system of jurisprudence, you have to face your accuser. You can't.
But I'm just saying there are a lot of municipalities and other counties that don't follow through in code enforcement.
I understand. They
John,
should.
let's do one more question and then hear from.
Yes, sir.
Maybe a clarification on what we were talking about on the voluntary restrictive covenants being in place. I mean, your language says county, municipality, or consolidated government, local governments may not prohibit. So you're really taking care of the issue there. If it's a voluntary agreement that's entered into with a, say, a Sun City type scenario, then I think that your language takes care of that issue.
I think it does. And that's, thank you, sir.
Well, a couple, three people want to talk. Todd and is it Rusey?
Thank you, members of the committee. You have your amendment.
Hang around, Earl. Tell us who you are. Of course, we all know who you work for, but.
Yes. Good day, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Members of the committee, I'm Todd Edwards with the Association County Commissioners of Georgia. We oppose this bill. We believe that these decisions are made best at the local level, as Representative Hardin has alluded to, by the folks that have elected to them and have insisted upon enacting such ordinances to suit their community best. As we know, cities and counties differ throughout the states. Throughout the state, what may be important to some in South Rural Georgia may not be to those in Metro Atlanta. With that, I conclude my remarks, and I thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I'm fighting a bit of cold here. And I'm Rushi Patel with the Georgia Municipal Association. And I'd like to echo Todd's remarks. One of the issues we have, I think, is best summed up by Roger Weaver, who's actually the planning and building director down in St. Mary's, who emailed me the other day about this bill, and what he said was about the city of St. Mary's: our city ordinances do allow farm animals as a special use in the R1 zone. This gives the neighbors the ability to express their opinion as to whether they will be affected positively or negatively in an open and public hearing. Taking the authority out of the hands of our local elected leaders is not a good idea. Community standards and their definition of quality of life varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And what Mr. Weaver is talking about is we have 535 cities and 159 counties in the state. And Cobb County is not the same as Clinch County, and Alpharetta is not the same as Alma. And what he's talking about is every city and every county is different, and keeping local leaders involved and local neighbors involved helps the process out. You know, I lived in Brunswick for 4 years before I moved up here to take the job with GMA last year. And one of the complaints I have with Atlanta is people in Atlanta tend to think they're the center of the state. And what you're doing here, if this legislation goes forward, is you're actually making Atlanta the center of the state and taking neighbors out of the process. And I think that's a big problem. And a second issue is, yes, this legislation would allow nuisance claims, but nuisance claims, as the author indicated, require going to court, and there's hundreds of cases on there. Going to court requires attorneys, and that can cost a lot of taxpayer money. And those are our two big issues with this legislation, and that would conclude my remarks, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Does anybody have any questions for either ACCG or GMA? I kind of do.
All right.
First thing GMA and ACCG could do would have a class for your code enforcement people and teach them the difference between livestock and poultry, number one. The other thing they could do, I think, was teach them the difference between reasonable and fastidious wants when it comes to a nuisance complaint. And some of these chicken houses that you see and some of these that I've seen in somebody's backyard look like mini chicken chalets. They're not a coop with a cedar post leaned up against another building and a wire nailed to a tree. I mean, you know, that's not exactly what some of these chicken coops look like. So I don't see how that can be a public nuisance just because you got 3 or 4 hens out there to get an egg out of. Have y'all ever, and this ain't got anything to do with anything, but there's a heck of a lot of difference between the egg you get in the grocery store and the one that's warm when you get it out from under the hen, when you crack it open. And that's just personal preference. But the local governments could do a huge favor to everybody involved, including the commissioners and city councilmen, if they would do a little bit of training on the code enforcement as to what a nuisance is and to what livestock and what the difference between poultry and livestock is, so that you wouldn't have half of these claims if they knew what was what. And there is a difference in the code between what livestock and poultry is. So, does anybody got any questions for either one of Todd or Rusey? Thank y'all very much for coming. We appreciate it. Lee Savage.
Hey there, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Good morning. So I'm far from the whole state of Georgia. I realize I'm one person in this discussion, and I like Earl's connection to the common sense gene. So I, as far as all the objections go, I certainly hear you from my side. But as a constituent, as a citizen, it's the health factor for me. I deeply respect my neighbors. Absolutely wouldn't want them flying around. I clip all their wings to make sure they stay within my yard, to make sure that they are not a nuisance to my neighbors, to make sure that they are contained as pets and in my backyard, to make sure that I get that fresh egg every morning, because I can't even eat store-bought eggs anymore. So that was one of the concerns that I heard y'all say. HOA, from the research that I've done, and I do live in a covenant-protected neighborhood, from the research that I've done, the HOA can make state and county laws more restrictive if you voluntarily, as he said earlier, if you voluntarily sign off on that. But I can handle my HOA because I have all the support of my neighbors saying, hey, this is great. We love having your chickens. We love the fresh eggs that you share with us. So I can handle the HOA as an individual, and I'm sure that the rest of the people who are fighting this currently can also handle their HOAs accordingly and go for the HOA vote to either have that amended or have that denied. But at least if we have a state law backing us, then we will at least have the right to say, hey, this is a state law. I understand that I voluntarily signed into these restrictions. I'm asking you to amend this particular restriction. And I asked Mr. Earhart if it would make sense for you all to maybe another amendment to make you more comfortable, to maybe limit the size of the flock, the quantity, not the size of the bird, but actually maybe the quantity, so that you're not going to end up with 30 hens in the backyard versus a dozen, which is what most of us are just asking for, half a dozen to a dozen to feed our families. As a cancer survivor, the increased nutrients that I have found from the research I've done, I greatly respect the Agricultural Committee, greatly respect what they do. I still buy chicken to eat because I personally can't kill one. But it's more about the fresh eggs and the right to be able to feed my family. As long as another comment y'all had was the local ordinances. Again, if we have state support, then again, we can handle the local ordinances on an individual basis because the different counties do have different things. But right now, I have no legal rights. I have no HOA, no county, and no state rights to even have a small backyard flock. So that's what is so frustrating for me as one of your constituents, as one of your citizens. I'm not really understanding how it's going to promote legal action between citizens because, again, I absolutely, wholeheartedly respect my neighbors. If a neighbor comes to me and said, that crazy hen starts cackling like a rooster, then I'm going to rehome her because I respect my neighbors, and that's part of being in a neighborhood. That's a part of being in a small community is because you want that neighborhood environment for your family and so forth. If I wanted a farm environment so that my daughter would be a couple miles away from her friends, then I would live in that environment. But it's important to me that she can run out across the street and run around in the cul-de-sac and play with her friends. So for me, being able to communicate intelligently, that common sense gene again, with my neighbors and so forth, I don't feel like that's promoting legal action. It's just promoting neighborly intervention, I would think, but that's me. And I wouldn't want to see rabbits slaughtered either. Hopefully that's, again, being a good neighbor, and you can say, hey, can you not do that in front of me, please? And hopefully that's, again, just dialogue within those neighbors to say, hey, that's offensive for me to see. That kind of makes me squeamish, and hopefully your neighbors are going to be respectful enough of you to do that in the back of their house, not right there in front of you when you're coming home from work. It's not something anybody wants to see. But that's all, and I was wondering if maybe making the amendment to limit the size of the flock would make it more palatable, but I don't see us as interfering with any other local government or HOA, because again, that's a voluntary thing that we have an ability to navigate within ourselves. But right now we have no rights. That's my 347 cents there.
Thank you, ma'am. Anybody have any questions? Appreciate you coming. Oh, you got one, Tony? Okay.
Does the bill written already limit the flock? By saying that it's got, you can only raise what you can consume in your household?
Yes, sir. I absolutely agree with that. But there may be some people who would, I guess you're right. Some people may have 8 kids, some people may have 2 kids. So, yeah, that's just sir.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. We're down to tinkering with this thing a little bit. Chairman Earhart, do you want to wrap up anything on it?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I've taken up enough of your time. I appreciate all the questions, members of the committee. Respectfully ask you that to pass this legislation with the amendments that Chairman Roberts is going to do, and then one of the Representative Hardin's, I'd be more than happy to, not the little catfish amendment, Representative Hardin. The other one I kind of like. Hold still, little catfish.
All right, Jay, you want to tell us what the language is you want to change that?
Yeah. We'll start on line 19. After the word chickens, add comma, with the exceptions of roosters, comma, and then after rabbits, add or honeybees.
Wait a minute, or honeybees or honeybees?
Honey or honeybees.
Okay.
Okay,
And then before the word coops, this one.
You still on line 20?
On line 20, before the word coop, add fully covered. After the word...
To keep them from flying out, right? All right.
After the word coops, add hives, comma. before the word pens, add fully covered. Then go down to line 21, and after the word animals, add or honeybees.
Let me see if I can read this. I didn't know you were a lawyer. I'm going to start on line 18. No county municipality, consolidated government, local government authority shall prohibit or require any permit for the growing or raising of food crops or chickens with the exception of roosters, rabbits, or honeybees in home gardens, fully covered coops, hives, or fully covered pens on private residential property so long as such food, crops or animals or honeybees or the products thereof are used for human consumption, yada yada. Is that right?
You ain't good there, Mr. Chairman.
The only animal we're restricting is a rooster.
No, there's no mention of goats or anything like that in here, but they're taking the roosters out so it don't wake your neighbor up at 5 o'clock in the morning.
You can have a pig, you can have a pig.
No, that ain't the intent of this.
Pigs are already allowed in another statute. Pigs are allowed in another statute.
Yes.
Only animal allowed. Okay, I'm just
And
trying to
rat.
think, I just trying to think.
And yes, sir.
And honeybee.
I'm sure the rest of us already know this, but if we exempt, they can't have rooster, they can't raise the bitties.
Right. Yeah, that kind of comes along with it. Some of these code enforcement people that don't know the difference between livestock and poultry may not know that, Doc. I appreciate you explaining that. 21 days at 98 degrees, right?
That's my amendment, though, Mr. Chairman.
Do we need to accept these amendments one at a time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we may need to do them one at a time. All right.
One
Then
from Chairman Roberts.
you moving on that, Jay?
I move.
Is that a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. All right. Now, Representative Harden.
I'd like to, on line 26, code section 41-2-4 to 41-2-3. And I'm not going to make my other request for an amendment because that really, to me, is taking away the local people's authority to govern themselves, and I would not want to do that. So I agree.
I don't have any issues with the other one. Three.
I move.
Second.
What are you talking about now? Explain that, Jerry.
2-3 deals with public.
Yeah, 2-3 will I can read it if you want.
Is there a short version of it?
Yeah, it's pretty short.
When I,
Here, Jeremy.
2-3 says filing petition
Highway.
of a private nuisance. A private nuisance shall be a.
That's correct, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It's probably inappropriate. This is a petition.
All right, we got a motion second.
I'll second this one.
All in favor of on line 26, changing the 4 to a 3? Say aye.
Aye.
Oh, no. All right, that it, bud?
That's it.
All right, is everybody clear on what we just did? Is there a motion on the bill?
Move to pass as amended.
You gonna do it as an amendment or a sub or what?
I just said amended. Or we can go by committee sub. However you want to do it.
It becomes a sub with the amendments, that's fine, either way.
As amended, and it becomes a sub.
All right, the second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Wait a minute. Just to be safe, all in favor raise your hand. opposed, raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is everybody satisfied?
That's the vote.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
We have one more thing that Will Wingate with the Conservancy is, and he has a presentation and he's talked to me about it, and y'all that own land may be interested in listening to what he has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee. I'll be very brief. The Georgia Conservancy not only plays a role in advocacy here at the Capitol, but we have a land conservation program as well, and our program focuses exclusively with helping private landowners figure out the ways to preserve their property, but gain economic benefits from doing so. And there are a lot of programs that are very confusing, quite frankly, that are run by the federal government.
I have this in the folder.
Yeah, you've got this in your folder real quick. But what I wanted to do is just come and introduce ourselves and introduce our staff. We've got Fuller Calloway, who works with me, and Leah Barnett, as you guys know, and Hans Neuhauser from the Georgia Land Trust, and I think Andrew Zwack from the Georgia Land Conservation Program are here as well. But what we have found is there's some programs that the federal government actually appropriates money to the state of Georgia that really haven't been used effectively. $10 million for this program, $12 million for that program. And basically what it allows a landowner to do is to take a wetland or a piece of river swamp, as we call it back in Irwin County, that would never be used, and apply for a wetland reserve program easement, and the government will pay you money to leave that land alone. And it's based on what's called a geographic rate cap. And if you'll look in your page here, I think it's page 4 or 5, you'll see this little colored chart. And it says 2012 geographic rate cap for the Georgia Wetland Reserve Program. In some of our counties, they'll pay $1,300, $3,000, $4,000 an acre for your property just to preserve it. They still give you the right to cut the timber, to hunt it, to fish it, to do everything that you were probably doing anyways with your property. They will also pay to restore the functionality of that wetland. So if you've gone in 30, 40, 50 years ago, your grandfather or your father or whoever you bought the property from, and ditched it, the government will pay you to fix that land back to where its functioning wetland was, and they'll pay you to preserve that property. And Georgia gets $10 million a year to do that, and we had to turn money back last year because not enough people applied for it. Additionally, if you have pasture land, some of you raise cows or have pasture land, there's a program called the Grasslands Reserve Program on the next page, where the government wants to set aside pasture lands in perpetuity to ensure that there is a healthy livestock industry in the state. And again, they will pay you for purchasing an easement, and it's based on a geographic rate cap. And I believe in Elbert County, Mr. Chairman, they'll pay you $3,340.97 an acre for doing so. There are some very lucrative programs in here, but how they're confusing. People don't have the time to go for them. A lot of time they'll walk into their local office and the NRCS agent doesn't know anything they're talking about, but they're here. And the state of Georgia is sending money back to the federal government because people aren't using it. If you have any interest or you have a constituent who is interested in learning about more of those programs, please call me or call Fuller on our staff. We will be happy to walk them through this process. We also help with conservation easements. And a conservation easement, as you know, is a agreement between a landowner and a land trust giving up certain rights to that property. But by giving up rights, the federal government gives you a very favorable tax deduction, and the state of Georgia gives you a tax credit that, thanks to a bill that you guys passed last year, you can now sell on the open market. So we have helped landowners receive quite a bit of money for preserving their property by selling an easement to the government, then donating an easement on the remainder of their property, and they basically achieved a tax-free transaction. They could still hunt, they can still cut timber, they can still farm, they can still do everything that they wanted to do and will do forever on that property. However, they've preserved that property, which is what the Conservancy is concerned about, but they received a very nice financial incentive for doing so. So that's what we're here to offer, Mr. Chairman, to the members of the committee and anybody else who have constituents that have problems or are interested in. Please call us, let us know. We will be glad to walk you through these programs.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Sheriff?
Man, I can take $3,400 an acre, keep doing what we do.
If you are doing pasture land, that land will remain pasture land, and they will pay you $3,400 an acre to do so, cash.
So if anybody on the committee, if you want extra copies of this, they can see Pat or Will, I think it might be something both need to look at.
Why haven't I got ourselves on it? Haven't been telling us this.
Well, they don't want to tell you they'll give you money away. You have to ask for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.